Joining me now for some of the best analysis of what's going on in Canberra and beyond, National Editor of The Australian, Dennis Shanahan. Great to have you on the show as always on a Monday, Dennis Shanahan. I spoke about this at the top of the show, this voice to the Parliament. Comments from the Prime Minister in your newspaper today on the front page. He said he's going to go ahead with this voice referendum in this term of Parliament, with or without the coalition. Now, I can't think of any referendum that's got up without bipartisan support. So what's driving this, do you think?
Well, look, I think you're right as far as the need for bipartisan support. And Anthony Albanese, I think, needs to look at Labor's record on referendums. Labor governments have proposed more than 20 referendums. They've actually got one through the system. So I think that what Anthony Albanese is doing here is very dangerous for his own cause. There's no doubting his own sincerity. It, in fact, was the first thing he mentioned on election night when he was making his victory speech. So there's no doubt about that. There's no doubt there is a widespread interest in it, that a lot of people have open minds on it. But I think the one thing that Anthony Albanese is doing here is he's pushing ahead too quickly. Even Aboriginal leaders are saying the same thing, and activist Aboriginal leaders are saying that this could damage the whole cause. The other danger that Anthony Albanese is rising here is the fact that he is making it a political issue as far as either the coalition is concerned or the Greens are concerned. On both sides, he's trying to polarise the debate. I think this is dangerous. He needs to spend more time telling people about what the voice is about and how it would work before he starts to campaign on a referendum or push it through. It will actually undermine his own aim at trying to get a voice of Parliament into the Constitution.
And I'll make the point I made just before, but I'll underscore it again. I mean, you have to have the model out there, well ventilated, well argued, understood by people before you ask them to vote. That simple yes or no question in a referendum can't be, you know, trust us, give us a blank cheque, we'll go away and design it. It's dead and buried from the get-go if that's what he's proposing. So I think to ventilate what the model could be when no one has really articulated the model yet, you know, in terms of how do you select these people, what are they going to do, what are the laws, what's the process, none of that's out there. So I think it's very ambitious to think it'll happen in this term. Let's go to the Prime Minister's trip. He took off yesterday. He's on his way to Europe. We saw some images there. He stopped in the Middle East en route. We always do that, I have to say, because you've got to refuel the plane, but it's good that he caught up with our service men and women there. NATO first in Madrid. There's a number of other Indo-Pacific leaders that will be there as observers. We're not a member of NATO, of course. So this is about sending a very clear signal that the issue of China, even though this is a North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, so it's a Northern Hemisphere body, absolutely China's front and centre. What do you think we can expect to come out of this beyond perhaps the issue of Ukraine?
Well, I think that the main thing that Australia, New Zealand, Japan and Korea are there for, and what they would hope for, is that Europe and NATO don't just look at what is happening in the Ukraine as being the great crisis facing the world. What we are seeing here is a message from the Indo-Pacific to NATO and the G7 leaders saying, look, there is a much larger game being played here, that Russia and China are in an alliance. We, along with the other Asian countries, are concerned about the no limits agreement between Putin and Xi Jinping. And so I think that the message which we want to get through, and clearly is getting through, when we see President Biden announcing a counter to the Belt and Road Chinese funding for the third world. So I think that that message is already there, and that's what we need to actually make even clearer as far as NATO and the European nations are concerned. This is more than just about Ukraine and more than just about Russia.
All right, talk to me about the French. After this meeting in Spain, he'll go to France. His personal invitation of the President Macron. Australian taxpayers have now paid almost $1 billion in compensation to end that dud submarine contract. Macron's got to move on, doesn't he?
Oh, he has. And look, it's very fortuitous for Anthony Albanese. I mean, before the election, he was able to say that the Australian government, the Morrison government, and the Prime Minister before, had actually committed Australia to a massive submarine contract for which we may have to pay up to $5 billion and not get anything. That was, of course, the contingency cost, $5 billion. It turned out that it was less than $1 billion that was actually paid. And so it's also fallen in Anthony Albanese's lap, where the payment has been made to the French. They are mollified to that degree, and so it can be a whole new chance to reset and realign the Australian-French relationship, which is very important, particularly with the role that France and the EU play in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the Pacific. So I think that what we'll see is a lot of hugger-muggering, but the background will be good for Australia, and it's good PR for Anthony Albanese.
All right, what about this policy announcement? He's only been opposition leader for 1 month. We've got one out yesterday from Peter Dutton. He wants senior Australians to be able to earn up to $600 a week before they lose their pension. Now, right now, they can only earn $300 before the pension's at risk. He said he wants to be constructive. He says, look, I want solutions to this worker shortage. And if the government would take it up, he said the coalition will back them in. Now, I reckon they'd be mad to knock back this idea, wouldn't they, Dennis?
Absolutely. And I think the most interesting point about this policy that Peter Dutton has raised is that it demonstrates the vast difference between the political antenna of Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg and Peter Dutton, because the coalition government, the Morrison government, had already looked at this. Peter Dutton said today, yes, they looked at it. It's not going to cost much. And in fact, poor old Jim Chalmers, as Treasurer, can't just say, yes, we will adopt it, we'll look at it. So what we've actually got here is Peter Dutton, as Leader of the Opposition, taking a leading position on a policy which is popular, which won't cost much, and was rejected by his previous colleagues because they thought that there was not a high enough take-up. In other words, what they were arguing was that reducing or increasing the amount of work that pensioners and self-funded retirees could do without affecting their benefits, there weren't enough people previously when they'd done it to take it up. Well, if that's a political decision. It's like when John Howard told Peter Costello to make changes to small business on the GST, and Peter Costello argued, look, it's not much, there won't be much take-up. They made the changes. Peter Costello was right. They didn't have much of a take-up, but John Howard was right on the politics because he knew that they had to be seen to be doing something. And that's what Peter Dutton is doing here. He's pushing Labor into a corner, and he can say, this is his idea now. And when Labor absolutely agrees to it after the budget and after their summit, Peter Dutton will take the political credit and the political kudos for something that probably won't cost much at all.
Yeah, and I just want to add too, before I go from you, Dennis, of course, we're in a much different situation now with oldies and the cost of living really biting. If senior Australians can get the opportunity to put another sort of $300 into the kick every week, to have $600 to help defray some of those costs, particularly their power bills, I think that it's going to have more take-up than perhaps the modelling 12 months might have shown the then Morrison government. But we'll see. Let's hope that it happens, and sooner rather than later. Thank you for your time, Dennis. See you next week.